Welcome back to Iraqi Dinar News, your go-to source for grounded, reality-based discussion on global economics, currency developments, and the geopolitical forces that actually shape financial outcomes. If you appreciate analysis that cuts through speculation and focuses on what's really happening behind the headlines, make sure to stay connected with the channel and share it with others who are looking for clarity in a space often filled with noise. There's been a lot of chatter recently around the UAE's decision to step outside certain OPEC constraints, and as expected, that conversation has quickly been pulled into the orbit of currency revaluation theories. It's understandable why people try to connect these dots. Major geopolitical and economic decisions often feel like they must signal something bigger, something imminent. But the truth is far less sensational and far more practical. The UAE's move had nothing to do with any kind of currency revaluation, whether regional or global. It was a strategic economic decision rooted in control, flexibility, and long-term positioning in the global energy market. When we look at OPEC, it's important to understand what membership and compliance actually mean. OPEC operates on production quotas. These quotas are designed to regulate supply in order to influence global oil prices. For some countries, this system works well enough, especially if they benefit from higher prices due to limited production capacity. But for a country like the UAE, which has invested heavily in expanding its production capabilities, these restrictions can feel more like a ceiling than a support system. If you have the infrastructure and the reserves to produce more, being told to hold back becomes an economic constraint rather than a collaborative advantage. That's where the UAE's decision comes into focus. By stepping away from strict adherence to OPEC-imposed limits, the country gains the ability to produce and export oil based on its own strategic interests rather than collective agreements. This is about sovereignty in economic decision-making. It's about maximizing return on investment in energy infrastructure and positioning themselves competitively in a rapidly evolving global market where energy demand, supply chains, and pricing mechanisms are constantly shifting. Another critical piece that often gets misunderstood is the role of the US dollar in global oil transactions. The idea that the UAE made this move to avoid being forced to use the USD as a medium of exchange is an oversimplification. The dollar remains the dominant currency in global oil trade because of its liquidity, stability, and the depth of US financial markets. While there is increasing discussion globally about diversifying away from the dollar, these transitions are gradual and complex. They involve trade agreements, financial systems, and trust between nations, not sudden policy shifts tied to a single decision like adjusting OPEC participation. The UAE, like many other countries, is exploring ways to expand its trade relationships and potentially diversify the currencies used in bilateral agreements. That's part of a broader global trend. But it's not a signal of an imminent collapse of the dollar, nor is it tied to any coordinated currency revaluation event. These are long-term strategic considerations, not short-term triggers. What's more important, and often overlooked, is how countries like Iraq are being positioned in the current global framework. Iraq is undergoing a process of reintegration into the international financial system. This includes modernizing its banking infrastructure, aligning with international compliance standards, improving transparency, and building credibility with global institutions. These steps are essential for any country that wants to participate effectively in international trade. This process is not about flipping a switch and suddenly revaluing a currency to a dramatically higher level. It's about building a foundation that supports sustainable economic growth and stable currency valuation over time. High-quality trading partners are not defined by sudden windfalls or speculative gains, they are defined by consistency, reliability, and adherence to accepted international trade practices. Iran, too, is often mentioned in these discussions, and while its situation is more complex due to sanctions and geopolitical tensions, there are similar underlying dynamics at play. Any movement toward greater integration into global trade systems would require structural changes, regulatory alignment, and trust building with international partners. Again, this is a gradual process, not an overnight transformation. One of the biggest challenges in analyzing foreign events is separating what is actually happening from what we hope it might mean. It's easy to fall into the trap of interpreting every geopolitical shift as confirmation of a desired outcome, especially in communities that are focused on specific financial expectations. But real-world economics doesn't operate on wishful thinking. It operates on policy decisions, market forces, and strategic interests. The UAE's decision is a perfect example of this. It's a move that makes sense when viewed through the lens of national interest and economic optimization. It allows for greater production flexibility, potentially increased revenue, and stronger positioning in global energy markets. It does not signal a hidden agenda related to currency revaluation, nor does it indicate a coordinated effort to upend the current financial system. If anything, it highlights the importance of understanding how countries are adapting to a changing world. Energy markets are evolving, with new technologies, shifting demand patterns, and increasing competition. Countries that rely heavily on oil revenue are looking for ways to maximize their advantages while also preparing for a future that may be less dependent on fossil fuels. This requires strategic thinking, investment, and sometimes difficult decisions about long-standing alliances and agreements. For viewers and followers trying to make sense of these developments, the key is to stay grounded. Look at the fundamentals. Ask what the direct economic impact of a decision is, rather than jumping to conclusions about indirect or speculative outcomes. Consider the broader context, regional dynamics, global market trends, and the internal goals of the countries involved. It's also important to recognize that international trade practices are built on standards and systems that have developed over decades. Countries don't become major players in global trade by making abrupt, unexplained moves. They do it by aligning with these systems, demonstrating reliability, and building partnerships. Iraq's ongoing reforms are a step in that direction. They are about creating a stable environment for investment, trade, and economic growth. The idea of prepping countries as high-quality trading partners is accurate, but it needs to be understood correctly. This preparation involves regulatory reform, infrastructure development, financial system modernization, and diplomatic engagement. It's not about orchestrating a sudden currency event. It's about laying the groundwork for long-term participation in the global economy. When we strip away the speculation and focus on reality, a clearer picture emerges. The UAE is acting in its own economic interest, seeking greater control over its resources and output. Iraq is working toward reintegration and modernization. Iran's path is more uncertain but still tied to similar principles of alignment and reform. None of these developments point to an imminent currency revaluation event, but all of them are significant in understanding how the global economic landscape is shifting. That's why it's so important to approach these topics with a critical mindset. Not cynical, but analytical. Open to new information, but grounded in evidence. The more we train ourselves to think this way, the better equipped we are to understand what's actually happening, and to make informed decisions based on that understanding. As always, Iraqi Dinar News is here to bring you that perspective. We're not here to sell hype or push unrealistic narratives. We're here to break things down, connect the dots responsibly, and help you see the bigger picture. If that's the kind of content you value, make sure to stay subscribed, share the channel, and keep the conversation going. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next update.